Period.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with FinanceAndLiberty.com, and back with us today is Dr. Ron Paul, former congressman and former presidential candidate. Dr. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Elijah, it's nice to be with you today.
All right, well, I'd like to talk today about the importance of liberty. Now, in your book, Liberty Defined, you wrote, "Our standards of living are made possible by the blessed institution of liberty. When liberty is under attack, everything we hold dear is under attack." So can you expand a little bit on this?
Yes, a lot of people wouldn't think of it that way because they see what's happening today as some people suffer more than others, and that's generally the case. But if the principle is violated, eventually it'll involve everybody. So if they violate the principles, say, of monetary policy and they print a lot of money, some people will benefit while others suffer for a while, but eventually it'll lead to such chaos. Same way with civil liberties. If you violate the civil liberties of certain groups or you give certain privileges to groups at the expense of others, it eventually gets out of hand and everybody suffers. So the motivation so often for those who want less liberty but more stuff and being taken care of, what they do is they vote for government to give them something, never asking the question, where does it come from? But eventually what happens is the capacity of society eventually ends, and then even those who seem to benefit, they suffer too. So if the principles of liberty aren't protected, I believe eventually everything goes. Like you could look at an example, say, in Nazi Germany. At the beginning, the people were doing better, and the business people did well because there was a partnership between big government and business. And yet eventually, the sacrifice of the principles of liberty led the government to become more authoritarian. Well, we're not quite where the Nazis got to, but we're certainly moving in a direction which is negative, and we've divided the country. We have the 99% and the 1%. I believe those numbers represent something very serious because it is very, very divisive. But eventually, if society breaks down economically or morally or in violence, we all have to be concerned.
Definitely. And when there's crises, it seems like people ask for the government to step in and save everyone, and that's exactly the opposite of what everyone needs, and it just threatens our liberty. Now, on Sunday, we saw this tragic Orlando terrorist attack, which ended up being the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. And we're going to see many government officials calling for the government to do something about this. Now, when we see this kind of crisis, what kind of liberties do you think will be under attack by government, and what do you see as a libertarian, how do you believe the U.S. should combat terrorism?
Well, we should do a lot less, a lot sooner. And I think if it's purely a terrorist attack by individuals who are very angry at us, of course, you have to deal with the foreign policy. This recent episode, I don't see it exactly that way because this is an individual I think was totally deranged, and he was using that as an excuse to do something he was destined to do and say that, I got this moral justification and I am going to serve the greater good by, associating myself with a segment of Islam that is radical and different but does not represent Islam per se. So I think that the big fallacy here is that we rely too much on government for safety. If you read the Constitution carefully, the founders didn't talk about safety. Safety was something that you taught your kids not to do dangerous things and walk out in front of cars and don't overindulge or take poisons and then things like this. So safety is not a function of government, but only indirectly. The whole reason that we're safe in our home has nothing to do because there's a policeman around or a policeman outside a house. We're safe because a lot of places in the country still are safe because they're allowed to own a weapon, and that helps them make them safe. But today we have developed a culture where it's negative to be favorable to guns for so many people, and it's also become an entitlement system and a dependency. So people, when they have trouble, instead of looking at the fallacies in economics, they say, Oh, well, the government's supposed to take care of me. They gave me free education, and my parents get free rent, and, on and on. So any problem with it is never their fault. It's never the fault of the economic system or the carelessness with which we have our civil liberties, where we assume more responsibility for ourselves. They defer and say, well, I want more stuff for free, and you hear it all the time. But governments are there to, in a limited fashion, to protect our liberties, believing that there's more prosperity and more safety and more peace if we accept that notion that it's a responsibility of the individual, and that not only should all individuals accept the non-aggressive principle, that is, nobody can initiate violence against somebody else, but we can't allow our governments to do it either, whether it's by taking from one group and giving special benefits to another, or interfering in the internal affairs of other nations, claiming that we know what's best for other people, even to the point that we use our own force, our bombs and missiles and sanctions and all these things, because we're exceptional and we know what's good, and we're going to force this on people and improve their lifestyle and make everybody safer and freer. Well, it's a failed system. What we want is more liberty for people to make their own decisions, assume responsibility. It won't be a perfect world, but I'll tell you what we're having today is very imperfect, and it's getting worse because they won't even consider the fact that it's up to individual liberty and self-reliance that really solves our problems.
Definitely. And you've talked about before about how, because the dollar is now used all over the world, the threat to liberty is not limited to the United States. You're right, dollar hegemony has globalized the crisis. Did you want to discuss a little bit about why the threat to liberty is a global issue?
Yes, because what we have been given, thinking that it would serve the world and serve the United States, and on the short run, and for certain groups it has, and that is allowing the dollar to be the reserve currency of the world, which came about by the rejection of gold and figuring that smart people now, they don't have to rely on something like gold, that they're smart enough to manage the money and know what interest rates should be and what the money supply should be. And that meant that we could literally print the gold. And before, gold couldn't be printed, so there was a limit to what we could do. So there was no limit to how much we could print, how much money we could spend overseas, get the advantage of buying stuff from overseas. It's cheap because we didn't have to earn the money or sell the goods. We just had it, and they kept accepting these dollars. And the immediate reaction there from countries like China and other places, we created prosperity for them and prosperity for us. But it was an illusion. It wasn't based on productions and savings. Savings quit. There was essentially, most countries' production recently has gone down. But it has globalized the system, and there's been fiat currencies, that is non-precious metal currencies, for many times over the hundreds and hundreds of years, and they always fail. But they thought they were smart enough to do it, but it's never been like this before, where it was so globalized, and the dollar became the instrument of our foreign policy too. That if somebody did something we didn't like, we would freeze their assets and punish people, which would be acts of war in reality. And this, of course, served to build enemies to us and for us to make so many mistakes, both in foreign policy, spend more money on the military and industrial complex and other things, and now it's in a way it's a financial huge bubble, both in what we do domestically, spend too much money on school scholarships and loaning money and houses and all these things, but also what we do overseas. But the problem becomes is when is that system rejected, and it always is, because debt and printing money is not a solution. If this could be a solution where debt doesn't matter and we can print money at will and everybody will take our money, there's no reason for anybody in America to ever have to work again. We could just print money and tell them to send us what we want, and that becomes so absurd. Everybody says, "Oh, that's not possible." No, but we're way beyond the point where it's practical and moral in the way we run our affairs, and that's why we're in such difficult times economically.
Now, last time I had you on, you mentioned that you see hope for the future because many young people are learning more and joining the fight for liberty. However, during this election cycle, I've seen a lot of my peers who support Bernie Sanders, a democratic socialist. So, what should young people like myself do to convince others that democratic socialism is not the solution and liberty is the solution?
Well, to start off with, it's one person at a time, and the first person you deal with is with oneself. And that is, people have to be curious to find out what makes the world tick. And you're in an age where I wasn't paying much attention, but later on, by the time I got into medical school, I got to wondering about this. So I was seeking information. There was no internet, but I did find a think tank called Fee Foundation, Leonard Read's group. So I sought these books and spent years and years trying to understand free markets and why monetary policy is important and why the foreign policy should be different. So I think that's the number one responsibility of young people, and not to be easily influenced in the wrong direction, especially if it's illogical to say that free stuff forever doesn't work, and yet that is the problem. If people, on a one-to-one basis, because that's what the next step would be, is try to influence people just one at a time, if nothing else, but never to demagogue and argue and push and ridicule, but to try to persuade intellectually. And when you run into a socialist, you say, well, there seems to be some shortcomings. Socialism was tried throughout the 20th century. The radical socialists was fascism and communism. That's all socialism, and look at what that led to. And also, if it's less international socialism, go to Venezuela. All you have to do is dig up some pictures and show what socialism is all about. And I think a lot of it is persuading people one-on-one. It's intellectual. But I still believe that there's a lot of people, in spite of the fact that a lot of young people gravitated to Bernie Sanders, I think there's still a lot very interested in the freedom movement. People like you give me a lot of encouragement because you understand the issues and you're spreading this information, and you probably have no idea if you've done how much good you have already done. You may have influenced hundreds of people, so you never know. There's always a remnant out there, and there's always new people that come in, and ideas are not well chronicalized. You just don't know who they are. But I think the opportunity that I see for your generation is the fact that not only did communism and fascism and Hitlerism all fail, in this century what you're experiencing, what we're all experiencing, is the failure of this interventionist Keynesian economics and fiat money. And I think people have to look at it as exciting and interesting and fun and very serious. And I think that's where we're making inroads. But when this thing is absolutely declared in default that it's not working, there will be more and more people looking for answers that if there's enough of us around to prove that it was a much better way to go toward more liberty rather than more government.
All right. Well, Ron Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Your website is ronpaullibertyreport.com. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our viewers?
No, Elijah, but it's great to have an interview with you, and I want you to keep up your good work, and I want others to join in and be creative. Create their own programs. A lot of times when I talk at the college campuses, young people say, what do I do? What should I do? I do whatever you want. But just do it, because what you're doing is not going to be what everybody else that gets interested. Some people, may become producers of movies or something like that, but it always has to be designed to work for the principle of non-aggression, the non-aggression principle. Nobody can initiate force. We just need more foot soldiers for that, and we can win.
Definitely. Ron Paul, thank you so much.
Sure thing. Take care.
This video was brought to you in part by ReluctantPreppers.com. Click here to watch Reluctant Prepper's latest interview with Robert Ellis Smith. Privacy guru Robert Ellis Smith, founder and editor of the oldest journal on privacy in the world, returns to Reluctant Preppers to spell out the many intrusions into our personal privacy and how to defeat them. Smith describes the simple ways to reclaim your inherent and constitutional right to keep your life and your business your own, despite intrusion from the NSA, the net, drones, and increasingly invasive technology. Plus, Smith shares breakthrough tips on cell phones, purchases, and medical records that you'll want to take action on right away.